Hello, and welcome to the Product Artisan Podcast show. I'm your host, Rajesh, and with me, I have a special guest today, Hiro Yamada. Hiro Yamada is a startup founder, entrepreneur, and an AI expert. Hiro is based in Tokyo, from where he joins us today. He's also the co-founder of FirstMate Technologies, a leading AI deployment firm. He did his bachelor's and his education at Harvard University and also has an MBA from Harvard. And he's worked at multiple companies, including Palantir, Google, Asana, before founding FirstMate. Hiro, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rajesh. Super excited.
Okay. First thing, it's great to have somebody similar time zone wise and who's kind of at the bleeding edge of tech. And I think we should talk about this. I think you and your founders operating out of Asia, but serving clients in the US is pretty impressive. So we should talk about that. First thing, just for our audience, what is FirstMate and what problem is it solving and for whom?
Certainly. So FirstMate is a software development agency that specializes in working with US startups. The problem that we're solving is that the talent war for technical talent in places like San Francisco and New York is very much real for a startup that is cash strapped, for instance, between pre-seed, seed round. They want to conserve cash. Every full-time software engineer that you bring on, you're burning an extra hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. So rather than doing that, we come in as an expert in building products for startups, and we tend to be able to do things at a slightly more cost-effective manner, given that we're based in Asia. And that has allowed us to partner with startups to build faster and better as they build a product and realize their vision.
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting paradigm, right? Because, with the advent of AI, specifically generative AI, everybody said smaller teams can go faster. Consulting firms, deployment engineers, others are going to be out of business, right? We don't need, all these bodies that have been implementing technology for a long time. But here you are working with startups, not even large enterprises, right? Helping them, I guess, is it 0 to 1 or is it from 1 to 100? Where exactly do you see the shortfall?
Well, we work with founders anywhere from pre-seed all the way up to Series A, Series B companies. When we are working with pre-seed companies, we are typically doing the 0 to 1. We're the first technical team that comes in to build out their product. Whereas if we're working with larger teams like Series A, Series B, we're typically working on a feature or integration or a particular module within their existing code base. And to your point about AI making software developers more effective and efficient, I think that's absolutely true. Compared to even a year ago or 2 years ago, software engineers are able to do X single-handedly compared to some time ago. But at the same time, the number of startups that is trying to apply AI to solve various problems in the world is also exploding. So what we are observing in the front lines is that the demand for software engineers that actually understand how to apply AI and how to own outcomes and deliver value to the world is net actually increasing.
So this is interesting. So basically the demand for software engineers is increasing, but those who have AI skills, right, who are able to leverage AI to compound software and engineering code productivity is what I'm hearing you say. So is this solving a talent gap or a time to market gap for these startups? You specifically mentioned from pre-series all the way up to Series A, Series B, and with that time-bound intervention, or is there something else you're trying to fix here?
I think we're fixing both of the things that you mentioned. The talent gap is definitely real. People are fully aware that amazing software talent exists outside of the United States, but getting access to the right people is incredibly difficult. And we definitely solve that problem. But then we also solve the time to market problem, where as AI is accelerating the pace at which software is developed, startups are under pressure like never before to go to market as quickly as possible, to build their moats as quickly as possible so that other startups that are trying to catch up are no longer able to catch up. Often this takes the forms of network effects or having user data on your platform so that your product is sticky. But this has always been the case, but startups are playing the game of reaching that critical point where you have enough moat that your competitors can't catch up. And that time pressure to reach that point is more intensive than ever. And so the demand for firms like ours is drastically increased. increased as a result of AI.
So this massive pressure that you're alluding to, does that make these startups overlook the fact that they are obviously leveraging a third-party agency such as yourselves? Because in the past, at least the conventional wisdom has been, hey, do everything in-house, right? Don't leverage outside talent because you'll create a knowledge-based system. Has AI kind of disrupted that they would, cross that bridge and say, you know what, doesn't matter if I don't ship this on time, if we don't compound this capability on time, we're out of business anyway. Is that making them stretch their hand over to you?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of COVID and AI. Not thanks to COVID, but because of COVID, we had a stretch a few years where everyone was working remotely. And at that point, the difference between hiring someone locally in the US versus someone remotely globally truly was non-existent. And that has taught startup founders and operators in the US that actually this can work. Working with amazing contractors or amazing engineers residing globally can be a very effective solution to the talent gap. So COVID was one reason that the traditional wisdom is changing quickly. And the second point is about AI that you mentioned is also absolutely true, where we can also use AI for validating the output that we're providing our clients, right? Things like writing unit tests, writing integration tests is also extremely fast now. So since as an agency or as the contracting firm, we're producing code that also is heavily tested thanks to AI, our clients are ever more comfortable accepting and taking code written by agencies like ours.
So is this, because on your website, it talks about production ready code, right? So is this a lot of, hey, I can quickly wipe code and I can create a piece of code that I'm ready to deploy, but I'm not ready yet because maybe I don't have the expertise or I need, someone to do it faster for me and my engineers don't have the time or the skill set. Is that where you come in, and how do you define production ready in an AI world where so much is changing constantly? How does FirstMate define that?
I think there's definitely an art and a science to it. There's that science part where there are these top 10 security vulnerabilities that we check for before we deploy any production code. We need to make sure that the code base has a certain percentage of test coverage before we're comfortable returning it to our clients. So there are a couple of predefined checklists that we go through to define whether or to determine whether a particular code base is production ready or not. But then there's also the art element to it. And I would argue that the art aspect of this has increased as a result of AI, because now a lot of the behavior that we are deploying to production is not deterministic. Maybe we're building a chatbot. Maybe we're building a feature that leverages LLM. Well, how accurate does the LLM have to be? Or what does the error rate, what is the maximal error rate you can tolerate with an LLM-based feature? That really depends on the use case, depends on the client. And that is where, we come in and provide our judgment and discuss with the client and decide how good does this feature have to be before we're comfortable launching it and shipping it to the client.
Yeah, I do want to come to the topic of forward deployed engineer. One of the questions is, how is this sustainable? Obviously, you're the experts and you're helping them move, from, for lack of a better term, vibe coding phase to a production phase with all the checks and balances that you just talked about. But how is it sustainable, i.e. the pace of change, the pace of iteration? How do you even scale such a business? Because I'm sure your talent is extremely rare to find. It's probably, I don't know, a small team. I don't know what the size of your team is. Then how do you end up not in a situation where it's like 1:1, right? You end up giving one engineer to a client and you're not able to scale. Is that something you run into today, or is it like deploy and then move on? How does it happen?
That's an excellent question. We're 35 people right now. We started this business 2 years ago, and this is our current scale. And, I think there is the reality.
My question was, you have all of these customers and your engineers are, for lack of a better term, for deploying engineers, and they're working with these customers to move these code into production, and along with all the checks and balances that you just talked about. My question is, how much is this scalable? Do you end up operating a large team, or do you worry about this business not becoming scalable, or you have some boundaries and guardrails to ensure that it does remain within a certain size? Because the speed of iteration almost demands dedicated teams and dedicated engineers. What are your thoughts on that?
So there's that growth. So let's talk about the growth. So we are a team of 35 people, and we've come here over the course of 2.5 years of being in business. Notably, last year in year 2025, we doubled the size of the business. And based on the high bar that we set when we recruit people and the training that we do internally and the internal checks and balance, all the management, given that we think doubling every year is a pace that we could or we can sustain. Anything more than that would be irresponsible rate of growth, and we wouldn't be able to guarantee the high quality that we provide to our clients. So that's on the headcount growth side, double every year. But then there's the additional part of making more money per headcount, leveraging AI and each engineer being more productive. As a team, we're every day getting better at using these tools, and the tools themselves are also getting better so that each engineer can provide more value. And so I think it's a two-pronged strategy where we're going to continue increasing our headcount, but at the same time invest to ensure that each engineer is providing more value to our clients.
So then what is FirstMate's USP? Obviously, you have strong talent, expertise, you're using a lot of AI tools, but just playing devil's advocate, one of the big four could come in and say, we have a fantastic AI team, we've heavily paid engineers, or a startup such as yours, right, trying to compete with you on your turf. So where does your USP lie then?
Could you remind me what USP means?
Unique selling point or your value proposition, core value proposition.
Yeah. I think it comes down to two things. One is that we are AI native. We started this company in year 2023, unlike the Deloittes or the Accentures of the world that have been around for decades. And given that, we have no organizational debt or baggage that we are carrying. On the day one that we launched this company, GPT-4 was already publicly available. And so things like the internal processes, our software engineering practices, there's nothing that we have had to unlearn. And we have been able to be a highly productive AI native team from day one. So I think that is something that have been a strength of ours. And then, at the same time, yes, there are competitors, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? Software engineering and contract engineering work and doing work in this field, it's a highly competitive space. There are a lot of companies doing the same thing. Most of them are low quality. There are also many high quality companies. At the end of the day, it does come down to doing an amazing job at what we do at a reasonable price point. And what is promising is that the market is competitive, but the market is also massive. So as long as we're competing in this massive market and we are doing an amazing job and we're very smart about leveraging AI, we're confident in our ability to continue growing this business.
Yeah, it's a great point you mentioned about the market and the market size growing, because AI software, if you think about it, is relatively new, and you certainly seem to have a first mover advantage. In your experience, what would be the market size for this globally for software and software engineering and software services for AI and AI applications? Any estimates?
Massive. There are multiple reports. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I read a couple of them. All of them give a number that is massive enough that I stopped worrying about it. But I would imagine it's in the tens, hundreds of billions of dollars, if not more.
So then that also begs the question, Hiro, I'm a product guy and always thinking about how do you productize something? How do you standardize something? So clearly you have the talent, you have a tech stack because you've repeatedly mentioned about AI tools that you use. So somewhere in this, is there a productization angle? Because, right, I think your Palantir experience, I think the FDEs there helped create the Palantir Foundry. The FDEs from OpenAI helped create their SDK for agents, right? So is there some productization that's helping you gain more leverage or even outrun your competition here? Or is this still very much we're just building with customers and learning along the way kind of a phase?
I think as we continue taking on more projects, we will extract out the commonalities across the projects that we are delivering and turn that into a product. But I do want to challenge the notion that productization is a necessity to build a scalable and profitable and successful business. I think Palantir is an excellent example. For the longest time, they've said that they have a Foundry and all these internal tooling, but behind the scenes, they were a consulting company. At least that's my understanding. And that is true for many of the AI startups today. There's one AI company that is actually a tax agency on the front, but behind the scenes, they have a lot of engineers and building internal tooling. I've come across immigration legal firms, so legal firms in general, that on the front just looks like yet another legal firm, but behind the scenes, they have a lot of AI engineers building their internal tooling. So I think in this AI era, having a services company is a very much a valid approach in terms of building a successful company. And you just need to be really, really good at leveraging AI behind the scenes. So yes, productization is something that we might work on, and we will keep an eye out for that possibility, but we're not necessarily forcing it at this time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too, right? Because a lot of this is discovery, figuring out workflows, and then kind of building to it, right? We're probably in the very early days. The 1.0 version of this, right? Stitching together these workflows using these AI tools. So it's very much a development-driven kind of an approach as opposed to here's a feature, right? Where there's productization becomes more relevant. I'm trying to build a feature in Zoom or Slack or whatever it is. And therefore I need a product manager to kind of work on that. Here it's more of a customer-led kind of an approach. At least that's how I understand it. What are some of the challenges that you see, right, in working with these startups, or maybe some lessons learned perhaps that enterprises can learn from, right? A lot of folks in the audience come from an enterprise background. What can they learn from your experience, and what's working or what's not working?
I think one pattern that we see over and over again is our clients not launching the product early enough. So what ends up happening is that we build something, it's secure, it's reliable, it's ready to go, but then there are always that additional feature that you want to build, or that bug you want to fix, or that polish that you want to apply. And that ends up delaying the launch by few weeks to up to even months, depending on the situation. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, speed is everything when it comes to startups. And you just got to get something out of the door, get user feedback, and learn and iterate quickly. Oftentimes, in my humble opinion, the quality of the feature requests becomes significantly higher once you launch, and they're based on real user feedback. So our recommendation always is to launch as quickly as possible. Understandably, from the founder's perspective, right, this is their baby, right? Their social capital is very much attached to this. Their reputation is tied to this product. So, they want to perfect it before they launch it. So, that's the one recurring pattern that I'm seeing, and perhaps something that our enterprise listeners can also learn from.
Yeah, so certainly speed seems to be the only competitive mode, because we're all trying to figure it out as we go along. And what happens to the talent piece of this, right? So you obviously have some talented engineers, right? You probably have a strong engineering culture. And is there a war for talent? We've seen some of these bids in Silicon Valley for AI researchers and engineers go to astronomical levels. Is that a challenge that you see in terms of talent retention and churn happening, or you guys have figured out some model that allows you to, build, engage, and retain these teams?
I think our retention rate has been great. And I think we are able to maintain this rate because we specialize in working with startups, and the projects that we bring to our engineers are just inherently very exciting. We are working with these YC companies or startups that have raised from Andreessen Horowitz or Bain Capital, and they're working on really cool AI projects and cutting edge technology. And so I think our engineers are both inherently excited about these projects and also see this as an amazing way to adapt to the new paradigm of software engineering and have a much, much stronger resume that they could present to their potential future employers. So far, because our clients are amazing, the retention has largely been a non-issue for us.
Yeah, so it sounds like, combination of working with these very exciting startups, scale-ups, and the scope of the projects themselves, right, is keeping your team really excited and engaged. What do you think are some of the hard skills are there, and obviously there needs to be proficiency and fluency with a lot of the AI tools. what do you think are some of the soft skills that make the best engineers stand out from the better engineers? Because almost everybody I talk to says I'm using all these different tools. It's really hard to make out at times. But from a soft skills perspective, what is it? Is there anything that stands out to you, or is this no different than, say, engineers who are building standard software or SaaS applications?
I think a couple of the same principles apply. For instance, communication is everything, especially since we're based in Asia and our clients are based in the US. Async communication or clear communication over Google Meet is just extremely important. But that's always been the case, even in traditional software engineering. I think the other thing is just adaptability and how quickly you can learn this new paradigm. Over and over, we're seeing this opinion going through the internet that junior engineers are doomed because they no longer can get jobs because all they can do are simple tasks that could be automated with AI. And I actually fundamentally disagree with that viewpoint. We have hired multiple junior engineers that come in with, maybe 2-3 years of experience. And sure, they might not have had the opportunity to design enterprise grade software, but they have also been extremely hardworking and also adaptable, that they have ramped up very quickly and adapted to this new world and new paradigm of software engineering. As you mentioned, this whole practice of building software that leverages LLM is extremely new. And in that sense, everyone's a beginner. And so in this really interesting way, I think the playing field right now is very leveled, and it's actually an excellent time for rather junior engineers to step up and work hard to catch up.
It's quite refreshing to hear, Hiro. Because you're right. The doomsday scenarios written all over. Engineers coming out of college can't find jobs. If you're somebody senior, you could be replaced by someone junior. There are so many narratives floating around depending on who you talk to. It's really hard to separate signal from noise sometimes. So it's good to hear from somebody on the trenches to say, yeah, it doesn't matter. You could be a junior or maybe even senior engineer. If you have the right mindset, the adaptability, and you're willing to pick up these tools, you can make a career out of it. Would that kind of sum up how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And how is, again, the pace of change of these AI tools is so rapid, right? And everybody, you hear folks say, adopt first principles thinking, adopt systems design thinking, right? There's so much. I had to unlearn a lot to do really good prompt engineering myself, right? Trying to learn how to use a co-pilot or a coding assistant. There was a lot of unlearning that had to go in. And how do you teach your engineers to learn? Or is this something that they've just picked up along the way and they just kind of get good at it? Is there a learning approach to leveraging these tools that is fundamentally different from, again, traditional software engineering practices?
So internally, we have learning sessions. Periodically an engineer takes a look at some piece of technology or some tooling that they're excited about, and they present it to the rest of the team. So no, there are some organizational systems to accelerate learning. But, I think at the end of the day, it does come down to hiring well and hiring engineers who are internally motivated to keep up to speed with the latest tools, and hiring people who are genuinely excited to automate their workflows and to just try out new things. And, these things aren't always easy to detect in, say, a 45-minute technical interview, which is why when we hire someone initially, they were put on a probation period, and we put them on a project, observe how they work, for the first 1 to 2 weeks. And through that, we get to usually detect whether someone is the type that's really excited about exploring new technologies, or the type that just, wants to type and not think. And, if we find out that's the kind of engineer that passed the interview, we sometimes have to let those people go.
Yeah. So I think that's something fundamental. I think that's a shift, right? With adaptability and learnability, because the tools will keep changing. But as long as you're flexible and you're adaptable, and you're excited to build these workflows, I'm curious, do you receive applications from folks who are unconventional, high school dropouts, or, folks from other backgrounds such as liberal arts, but who may be equally good? Do you consider those folks as well, or is there kind of a typecast AI engineer in your mind?
We have not hired high school dropouts. If anything, we now have people with master's degrees. And, I think this is arguably unfortunate, but a natural trend in humanity. where as technology advances and that new technology automates the more menial and simpler work, people need to stay in school for longer to be a productive member of society. 100, 200 years ago, when people were largely farmers, didn't necessarily have to go much beyond middle school. But, as technology progressed, people have been staying in school for longer years. And I think AI is accelerating that trend where we will see more people completing college degrees and even master's degrees. And that will also trickle down to the type of people that companies like ours are hiring.
No, it's a great observation, and I didn't really think about it. I think traditionally it was go do your bachelor's if you want, go do a master's or an MBA. In some cases, like research, go get a PhD. Now the question is, you're stuck in a quandary. On one hand, you don't want to be underqualified from an education perspective. On the other hand, AI is changing so fast that you become redundant if you just stay long enough in academia and you don't make that switch. So I think we definitely live in interesting times. But I'm glad to hear, and I'm sure our listeners would also be glad to hear that you have candidates who are masters. So folks listening, there is still value in education, right? While the internet is telling you to just forget college and university and just go for it. One thing here I wanted to talk about is, again, I shared this kind of, working across time zones, right? You're based in Tokyo, and I think your teams are based in Tokyo and Manila, perhaps, and serving clients in the US. And again, this is no different. This has happened before, right? There's history behind this. Manila is a huge BPO center, and they've done exceptionally well. But with AI and the speed and a lot of these startups, it's do or die, right? They don't ship that feature, they don't ship that product. Maybe they lose their next funding round, or maybe they they run out of cash, whatever it is, right? How are you bridging that, and is that putting a lot of pressure on the teams? And how do you kind of mitigate that? Is there any buffer mechanism to address that?
Different teams approach this differently. I'll describe the thing we don't do. I have met other agency owners or even startup founders that have their Asian counterparts work inverted shifts. So they would work full US hours, which typically means that you are waking up at 9 p.m., you start work at 10 a.m., and you go until 4 a.m. I think some people call that the quote-unquote graveyard shift. We do not do that at FirstMate because we fundamentally believe that you are unable to be a fully productive human being conducting intellectual work with that kind of lifestyle. And therefore, we do two things. One is that we shift our time zones a little bit. So, we don't wake up at 10 p.m., but sometimes our engineers wake up at 6 a.m. or some engineers go work until 11 p.m. That kind of adjustments that we do make to maximize the overlap that we have with our US counterparts. And then two, it just comes down to amazing documentation, being really good at Slack communication, being really good at solving problems autonomously without help from the US. And, this just comes from doing these projects over and over again. And we become better at this organizationally.
That's great. That's great to know. And it's great to hear that you have good work-life boundaries, at least in your organization, right? Given the speed of change and the speed of technology that's evolving. What's the one kind of key takeaway for audiences, for leaders, technology leaders, product leaders, and others kind of listening to this? Again, you said you've been in business 2.5 years, and obviously you're scaling, you're growing rapidly. What's the one kind of takeaway that they should be thinking about, or one thing that surprised you that nobody else is kind of thinking about when it comes to AI and AI development?
I think let me say two things, if that's okay. And they're related. So I think I could argue that it's one thing. The first thing is that speed is everything, right? I've mentioned this multiple times, but with AI accelerating the speed of software engineering, you just got to move fast. And otherwise your competitors will catch up. So the name of the game is build a deep enough of a moat before your competitors can. And that is just all about speed. So launch quickly, iterate quickly. That's the name of the game. So I think that's one takeaway. And on a related point, one methodology that enables you to move so quickly is to leverage international talent. I have been surprised to learn that so many startups in the US don't necessarily brag about it, but are behind the scenes using and leveraging international talent. It's not something that you brag about on LinkedIn, right? It's not something that you brag about on stage because all startups want to claim that they're building all their technology in-house. But in this world where speed is everything and you just have to move super quickly, leveraging international talent is an effective way to do more with the same amount of budget that you have. So those are the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, when the margins are so thin, right, and there's no room for failure, maybe not just going faster, but going further for every dollar that you spend could be the true competitive advantage. At least that seems to be where FirstMate has been successful. So Hiro, where do we find you? Where do people follow you? Are you on where are you on X, or are you on LinkedIn, or what's the best way to kind of follow and learn from you?
I'm on X, LinkedIn. I post every day, both on the platform, both on both of those platforms. The company website is firstmate.tech. So any of these ways, you're able to reach me.
Okay, great. So Hiro, thank you so much for your time again. And it's really exciting to see AI startups coming out of Asia, and looking forward to greater success for FirstMate and setting new benchmarks for the rest of the industry. Thanks again.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rajesh.